Broken Edge is a fantastic newish VR game that breathes completely new life into sword fighting games. The premise is simple. Hit your opponent once to win, just like fencing. There are all sorts of different classes to play as, all inspired by historical warriors. Or are they? You see, some are quite clearly inspired by certain historical icons, and surprisingly enough, a handful seem to be based off of total real people. So we're going to look at each class, their design, weapon, fighting style, etc. to determine which is the most accurate of them all. Now, one more thing before we get the ball rolling. Now, I'm sure it goes without saying, but I'm not an expert, so if I got anything wrong, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. I tried to do my best research, but obviously people make mistakes. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive in. So let's go ahead and start things off with the Tyrant, who I'm going to be honest ended up being way more of a rabbit hole than I expected him to be. Now, he's the hardest one to identify because his name doesn't point to where he's from, unlike literally every other character. So the thing with the Tyrant is that he's actually kind of a mixture of a couple different things that you don't really notice at first. So let's go ahead and break it down and just start with the armor. So no doubt about it, the Tyrant is dripped up. But is it good drip or is it historical slander? Let's find out. The answer, it's wishy-washy, okay? This guy is a rabbit hole. Let's just start with the helmet. The helmet is more Greek-inspired, Spartan-style helmet, so that's not super accurate to the whole knight aesthetic. I think they add this Greek kind of style just to give him more otherworldly, ancient vibes. The real question, though, horns on the helmet. Now, I'm sure you've heard Vikings didn't have horns on the helmet. That's just a Hollywood thing. We'll get to that later. However, this guy seems more like a Teutonic knight, and those guys actually did have horns on their helmet, sometimes. It seems that higher ranking people were drawn with them. We found some examples of horned helmets that seem to be decorative. So did they fight in horned helmets? Probably not. And if they were not in like the real fighting, they were just kind of giving orders. So, as a tyrant, as the leader of a nation, he probably did have the decorative helmet, but would it be Greek looking? No. So overall, the helmet is like a 5 out of 10 for accuracy. Sure, it could have happened, but it's very unlikely. And I kid you not when I say learning about the horned helmets took longer than anything else on this video. It's like a 50-page article. Go ahead and click it down below. Basically, it just says, who the heck knows? Some people are drawn with it. Some helmets have been found, and no one really knows for sure. Now, moving on to the weapon. Now, the weapon seems pretty kind of over-exaggerated, but actually it is pretty much shot for shot of what a real sword would have looked like back then. So this is specifically looking like something called a Zweihander, which is basically a two-handed sword from the Middle Ages. Now, the thing that gives this away is in all the different versions of the sword concept art, we always see that kind of cross-blade section part of that blade, right? Halfway above the hilt. Now, that's actually a realistic part of what this Zweihander was for, because it would help you half sword, basically grabbing your blade to have more control, and that's actually how the Tyrant fights. So his fighting style and his weapon are actually very realistic to how that weapon would have been used in those times. So let's give it like an 8 out of 10. So, overall, is the Tyrant a realistic character? As you could guess, kind of. You can definitely see the inspiration, and the fighting style is actually pretty on point, but the overall design and naming just doesn't quite jive. So let's just give him a 7 out of 10 overall. More realistic than not, but definitely not as good as some of the others on this list. Next up, we pretty much just have the Tyrant's lil bro, the Knight. Now, the Knight is much more clearly inspired by just generic knights, and also his name is literally the Knight. So, when we look at this, we can kind of compare him to those Crusaders. We see that very iconic slit eyes with kind of the great mouth. So, helmet, pretty accurate. Now, his weapons, he has a short sword, long sword, and shield. The long sword can be used with 2 hands or 1. That's all pretty accurate. That fighting style is pretty reflected well. He has a very defensive fighting style, which is kind of what the knights were built for. So all of that, pretty dang accurate. The only thing I could really find that wasn't looking too good is the chains. All the chains that we see in some of these different concept arts, that it looks awesome. Not really realistic. Everything else, though, is actually pretty good. So let's go ahead and give the Knight like a 9 out of 10. Next up, we have the Duelist, which I think is the coolest kind of real-world tie I was able to find out of all these characters. However, I'm not quite sure how I'm going to display the information without sounding like an idiot, so just bear with me. I promise I'm not trying to be offensive on purpose. But we can see that at first glance, Duelist is a very kind of musketeer, Renaissance Italian duelist kind of masquerade-themed character. So we kind of have that general area and historical time period set. Now, something I noticed while looking over this concept art The duelist appears to be rather feminine for a couple reasons that I won't say out loud. Another thing is that in game is actually a lot easier to see. They actually have a bun of their hair underneath the hat, which seems like they have longer hair than they're kind of willing to give away. Now, did female Renaissance duelists exist? I couldn't find a ton of concrete examples, but I'm sure there was some. However, there is actually one very interesting example who is very hard to explain, but I honestly think they might have been inspired by this exact person. So their name was Charles Chevalier d'Eon de Beaumont. I don't speak French, forgive me. Basically, he was born a man, kind of pretended to be a woman, would fight duels as a woman a lot, and kind of went back and forth, became a spy. It's a super crazy historical story, but long story short, I just don't even know what pronoun to use, and I'm going to get flamed in the comments. So I'm sorry, guys. Super cool article. I just have no idea how to describe it, so I'm going to link a video and an article about them down below, and you can decide for yourself. So overall historical accuracy, I mean, I'm going to have to say pretty much 10 out of 10, because it seems to be based off a real person. Next up, we have one of the characters that was added in a later update after the game came out, so they don't have as much concept art. We have the Pirate. Now, the Pirate's pretty interesting. Again, they appear to be female for reasons. Now, were there female pirates? There's a couple pretty famous examples: Anne Bonny, Mary Read, Sheng Yat Sao. So, I speak English, okay? I don't know. Weapons are pretty accurate. They wouldn't have that many on them. We can see the pirate has like 5 or 6 weapons on them. So that's not accurate, but the weapons they are using are actually pretty much based off of just real weapons. Holding the knife in the teeth, very iconic thing for pirates to do. Pirates just didn't do that. That's just not a very smart thing to do. Last but not least, skull mask. As you can guess, pirates didn't really wear skull masks. So overall, did female pirates exist? Yes. Did they carry 6 weapons and a skull mask? Not really. So let's just give it a good 6 out of 10. Next up, we have another character who was added later after the game came out, so again, basically no concept art. We have the Viking. Helmet is actually accurate because they didn't have the Hollywood horns, so the helmet's pretty good. Same with the sword and shield, they both look pretty good, and the axes. The only thing that's a little unrealistic is the axes wouldn't really be used dual-wielded. You're not just going to have 2 hand axes just spinning them around. That'd be awesome, but it's not quite accurate. So overall, the Viking actually does seem to be a pretty good carryover of what the historical Viking would have looked like, and a couple things that you probably would have expected the developers to fall into, like the horned helmets and stuff, actually doesn't show up. So overall, I'd say they're pretty realistic. Good 7, 7.5, 8 out of 10. Also, side note, these ratings out of 10 literally make no sense, so you can kind of just ignore them. Alright, moving right along down our list, we have the Barbarian. This is one of the other ones that's a little trickier to pinpoint the name. Historically, barbarians are usually these more Celtic people who took down the Roman Empire, and that's actually what this seems to be, especially when we look at the alternate concept art, other than the guy who looks like he was ripped straight out of Skyrim. They all look pretty Celtic. We have these braids, we have these Celtic designs, all that kind of stuff. However, if we look at the realm in which you fight them in, we see mammoths. Now, as you can guess, humans didn't live with mammoths, so this guy is clearly a 0 out of 10. Just kidding, actually, I have a conspiracy theory. He's not Celtic, and it's actually completely accurate. Now, you might not have heard of a city called Göbekli Tepe. Göbekli... I am the glob glob gab glab. Now, this city is one of the oldest cities ever discovered, and it was actually so old that mammoths were still alive when the city was built. Did two-handed swords exist when this city was built? No. But if we actually look at the ruins, these pillars in the ruins look very similar to the giant sword statue behind this guy, so it's a bit of a stretch, but maybe the Barbarian is actually the most ancient character on this list, living in one of the first cities ever made coexisting with mammoths. Was the sword realistic though? No. Is the armor realistic though? No. If you look at it from the Celtic point of view, it's a little bit more realistic, but still not great, so overall let's give it a 4 out of 10. You can see the inspiration, but it's definitely not viable. Next up, we have my most favorite aesthetic character, which is going to be the Persian. This name is very interesting because it's combining these more Middle Eastern, medieval kind of tropes with these ancient Persian tropes all together into one awesome desert character. So we see these more ancient Persian masks in some of these concept arts, or just kind of more generic, like, robes of the Middle East, right? Now, again, we have some evidence of womenness in this character. Also, the fact that they're covering everything but their eyes can't help but slightly imply that as well. So, how often were women warriors in the Middle East? There's a couple kind of mythical, legendary examples with a few historical facts, but overall, there weren't too many examples of women warriors in the Middle East. One other thing that's pretty clear, the dual-wielding scimitars just didn't really happen. Again, there's a handful of myths that kind of fantasized it, but it was definitely not the norm to be wielding two scimitars. Does it look absolutely sick, though? Yes. Historical accuracy? Probably 3 out of 10. We could see the inspiration, but basically none of it really would have happened in real life. Next up, we have a very iconic character, the samurai. Now, we have some awesome concept art for this samurai. So, first things first, the armor. Armor overall, pretty accurate. The helmet, you might be guessing, is like totally wrong. However, samurai helmets are one of the rare examples of just absolutely weird helmets actually being used. So, horns, you can find samurai helmets with horns. Antlers, even. Mustaches, beards, fangs. Everything. If you can think of it, samurai probably had a helmet for it. They're honestly a super cool topic. Just look at samurai helmets. They're one of my favorite things to look at. They're just so freaking cool. So, armor, pretty realistic. However, the weapons. The weapons themselves are realistic. Katana, even if it's two-handed, pretty realistic. We have those smaller katanas, tantos, wakazashis. Those are pretty realistic too. However, the fact that he has 3 of them, unless you're a One Piece fan, very inaccurate, right? No one fights with 3 katanas. Usually, there's a system called the Daisho, which involves the larger blade and the smaller blade. All the concept art actually reflects this. We see he only has 2 swords. In the actual game, however, he has 3. So for that, let's dock a point and let's just give him an 8 out of 10. Weapons are almost there. Armor is pretty much totally there. Accurate character overall. So there you have it, everyone, all the characters, as of right now at least, in Broken Edge. However, as a little bonus, I actually wanted to go over 2 different character ideas. I probably should put this in a separate video, but it's a VR game. No one's gonna click on it anyway, right? So, 2 ideas I have for new characters. First things first, we have the Pharaoh. So the Pharaoh would use the Khopesh, that curved sword. He would have a large hide shield, kind of as that defense. The only other thing I can really think of is he'd have the sidearm of a spear, which kind of like the Viking axes, it only does damage if it hits the tip. If you block it by hitting the shaft of the spear, it doesn't do any damage. So there's the Pharaoh. And then last but not least, this is my favorite idea, and I want them to add it so bad. We have a lot of awesome diversity in these characters, so please can we get the Jaguar? This would be an Aztec Mayan-inspired character using a Mockweedle, that club with obsidian spikes. Here's my idea. The Mockweedle, unlike all the other blades in the game, can actually move as fast as it wants because it's always going to be maximum awakened because it's that super sharp obsidian. And just like the Ronin's sheath, if you hit the wood part of the Mockweedle, then it would just do damage to your awaken or to your blade and it wouldn't really affect it. How do we balance this out? Every time the obsidian hits the blade, it'll do maximum awaken, but also that piece of the obsidian that hit the blade is gone from your blade forever. So you get progressively less and less spots on your sword that you can actually hit the enemy with. So even though it's going to do a lot of damage, you run out of options very quickly. So this is just a super fast-paced, fun character, and I want them to add it so bad. It would be so fun. And even if it's not exactly like this, if we could get that ancient American sword fighter in there, that would be sick. So there you have it, everyone, the historical accuracy of Broken Edge presented by a complete moron. If you made it to the end, just kidding, no one made it to the end. My channel has nothing to do with this game, and really, this game isn't that popular, so I'm gonna just assume no one saw this. However, if you're one of the 2 people who made it to the end, thank you. If you liked the video, leave it a like. If you hated the video, that's fine. Love yourself no matter what. I hope you have a nice day. Last but not least, answer this question and you can end up in the end of the video, next video, just like these guys here. So here's the question. What is your favorite historical weapon or warrior? Alright, I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.